Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Paul here with CloseSimple. Thanks so much for taking a minute to hop on the webinar with us today. I'm the CEO here at CloseSimple. Again, Paul Stine. I'm here with Nate Niemi, our head of product. You want to introduce yourself beyond that, Nate?
Head of product, CTO, head of security. Got my hat right here.
Yes,
I think that about wraps it up.
Yeah, we actually got Nate a security hat so that when we actually have to talk about security around here, he can put that thing on. So he might put that on throughout the course of this webinar. Who you may not see, who you saw in sort of the lead up to this webinar is Genady and Alex. And actually, how we like to do our webinars here at CloseSimple is we actually reach out to industry professionals, experts, and we say, hey, can you answer some questions for us? Can you find some time, on your time to actually put some thought into the things we should be thinking about the topics that we cover? We're going to play a number of videos from them today as we start to dig into this topic of fraud. And why are we talking about fraud? Because it's Fraud Prevention February, and at CloseSimple, we believe you should crush fraud, not hearts.
Why didn't I get a shirt?
Well, you could have. They're over there.
All right.
But you did get a mug. And so if you want to get yourself into a Crush Fraud Not Hearts mug this February, we will send you one of these, and really, obviously, this is a very serious topic and we're going to dive into it in a second. But, at the same time, like one of these on your desk or your team's desks might be a good reminder to make sure that we're on the lookout for fraud. Again, Fraud Prevention February, Crush Fraud Not Hearts. Email me, paul@closesimple.com, if you want to get your own mug for that. Before we dive in, Nate, let's talk real quick about fraud prevention. At CloseSimple, this is obviously a big piece of what we do throughout the course of 2024, where we were actually able to layer in a number of fraud prevention features around identity verification and wire fraud prevention. And we really believe that what we do here, customer experience, is actually a great sort of just baseline for how you do fraud prevention. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I think a consistent experience is really what we're going for here. And so I think with a lot of the way we handle this, you're asking your customer to log into another website, verify their ID there, maybe provide wire instructions to another website. This softens them up for the fraudster to be able to reach out from in a non-trusted channel to be able to interact with them. So we see that bringing that consistent experience helps reinforce where trusted information comes from.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have a branded communication driving to a branded portal and you have a consistent customer experience throughout the process, now your buyer is not getting 6 different things from 6 different emails throughout the process. And, all of a sudden they get that email at the end and it goes, oh my gosh, we have, like new wire instructions. Yeah. If they're getting a consistent thing, now all of a sudden we can thwart that. And you hit on it, Nate. We're talking about trust, and we're talking about trust in 2 different directions. Talk about the trust that we're building in this process.
Yeah, so over the past few years, as we've been building out our consumer portal product, we've really focused on how can we build trust between your customer and you. And we've been very successful at that. We're getting the information in there. We're getting great completion rates on our tasks. But we started thinking about, okay, we've got this one-way trust really going. How can we kind of turn that around and use that portal to help you build or for you to have more trust in your customers? Things like, are they who they say they are? Am I actually communicating through a secure channel with this person? So really, we're trying to create that trust building exercise out of this whole thing, so it's going both ways.
Yeah, exactly. So again, if you joined after we started, I'm Paul, this is Nate, we're from CloseSimple. We are going to hear from Genady and hear from Alex in just a second. And how we do our webinars is we're gonna tee up parts of this conversation, hear from our experts, and then we'll have some further discussion about what we're seeing from a fraud prevention perspective across the industry. Again, I have to plug this one more time. Fraud Prevention February, Crush Fraud Not Hearts. If you want a mug like this, you can email me, paul@closesimple.com, and we will send 1 or a 6-pack out to your title company, to your law firm if you want to check that out. Okay, so let's get into the meat of our webinar. We're talking about fraud prevention. So we're going to hear from a couple people. We've got Genady from Stewart queued up. Everybody, I think, knows who Genady is, but he's a seasoned cybersecurity leader with over 2 decades of experience in financial services and insurance. As Chief Information Security Officer at Stewart Title since 2015, he directs global cybersecurity, governance, compliance initiatives. If you follow the Alta, sort of message boards, he's constantly posting and providing information to the industry about how we can make sure that we are protecting ourselves, our team, our organizations,
and our customers.
He holds like every certification you can get in the security space, really underscoring his expertise in building robust security programs and countering emerging threats. We're going to hear from Genady. We're also going to hear from Alex. Alex is a respected leader in the title and escrow industry with over 30 years of experience as COO at Near North Title. He oversees a multi-state network, bringing expertise in real estate operations, compliance, technology-driven efficiency. Had lots of different roles throughout his career. This guy was literally building, the first ever like digital databases on FileMaker Pro back in the day. This guy's been in the industry. He knows what's going on. And we're super excited to hear from them. So just to queue up the first question for our experts, we really said, what's one common misconception about fraud prevention in the title industry that you believe needs to be addressed? So without further ado, we're going to hear from Genady first, then we're going to hear from Alex. Let's dive into our topics on fraud today.
We have believed for decades that our signature disclaimer warning about wire fraud works. That is the biggest misconception. We have seen numerous cases where a fraudster copy an escrow officer email signature, including their picture and a wire fraud disclaimer, and send the fraudulent wiring instructions. Buyers and sellers are still falling for it. And while we're on a topic, the flyer that realtors give to the buyer or seller with a wire fraud disclosure or DocuSign version of it doesn't work either. We need to start talking to these folks, educate them about the process, and warn them about the risk early on.
Right, let's hear from Alex too.
Fraud, misconceptions. Okay, this one I'm going to throw a curveball at my friends at CloseSimple here, because I think maybe one of the misconceptions is that any solution you have to stopping fraud can be 100% tech. I have thoroughly enjoyed rolling out the fraud prevention stuff that we've utilized with CloseSimple, and we're not fully through our journey with figuring out how the right way to use it. I think the thing we've learned the most is that this really has to be an open conversation between the field, the people that deal with the clients, and the technical, people at CloseSimple and our people that are implementing this there, our software team. You can't just throw the technology at something like this. It's got to be a group effort. First of all, it's detrimental to your business if you over-index on tech, because your clients will feel it. So this really has to be a consideration of how you fold this into the human interaction that goes down at a successful closing. So I think that's probably a misconception. Like, you can't just throw money at tech and think this is going to solve the problems for your company. You've got to put in the effort as a company to implement this thing and weave it into your behavior, and not just make it feel like a clunky technical bolt onto the process.
All right. Some good thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So education, open conversation, collaboration of people along with technology to make sure we're combating this, making sure we're getting out in front of communicating to our buyers and sellers. Nate, there's a lot here. Maybe unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's stark, but the best defense is getting people to rethink these biases and to educate them, and maybe get them get their antennas up early in the process. And I really like what Alex said too about even as a technologist, I guess, and building technology solutions, it is not the only solution. It's not the only piece of it. Really needs that human in the loop, as he mentioned, for business reasons and just to get that human intuition involved. And I think the key to it is that the tech has to be used as well. So automating it, But what we always run into when we're automating it is, oh, I have a really good customer. I don't want to bother them with this tech. I know they're who they say they are. I work with them every week. So providing the opportunity for exceptions in that process as well. Again, considering the human in the process.
Yeah, for sure. All of the humans, I guess, it's one thing when we automate solutions to help identify seller identity fraud and people say, well, we don't want to bug that person with this. And I'm like, are we sure it's them? That's the whole point of what we're trying to accomplish. That said, you may have regular investors who are sellers and different things of that nature. So we need to make sure that we keep that in mind, but then also keep in mind that the human intuition is such a big deal. So
one
really
size doesn't fit all.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to kind of like build on what Genady was saying, just a little bit more about how do we get out in front of this? How do we communicate to our buyers and sellers early in the process what these types of issues could mean? Again, it's not just enough to have the email signature. You have to be proactive in making sure you say the likelihood of you being targeted by this is very high. Make sure you're being vigilant. And then how do we create friction along the way to continue to educate buyers? And we really try to do that a lot here at CloseSimple with saying, how do we actually make this a little bit hard for them so that they remember this moment where they said, oh yeah, we'll never change our wire instructions, never email them. Now I'm getting this email. How do we put that friction in place intentionally?
Absolutely. Our dummy questions, they seem easy, but it gets you thinking. You have to interact with it. And we believe, and results speak for themselves, that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go into our next question from our experts. So we have these misconceptions, but let's talk, a little about how we can start the process of thinking more proactively about fraud. We have these misconceptions. How do we think more proactively? The question we posed, what are your thoughts on being proactive versus reactive when it comes to fraud? Again, we'll hear from Genady and then we'll hear from Alex.
It is imperative that we get in front of the process early enough. It is more than ever important to talk to the buyer and seller as early as possible, physically meet them or make a phone call. To get the attention we need, the conversation literally needs to go as follows. There is a 50% chance that the fraudster will target you during this transaction. If you fall for it, there is a 90% chance that you won't close on this transaction and lose money. Here's what you need to remember. The rest of the message could be standard warning, but we need to get the buyers and sellers' attentions as early in the process as possible. I don't think we're delivering the right message early enough and in consumable format. Remember, we live and breathe this reality every day. Our consumers face it on average once in 10 years.
Right. Thank you, Genady. Let's hear from Alex.
When I think about how being proactive versus reactive relates to fraud in our industry, I'm reminded of a couple of things that are kind of long-held thoughts of mine in our business. And one is that we don't do a very good job of sorting the easy from the hard, the risky from the not risky. And as a result, we tend to do the same process on all files. As I've implemented the CloseSimple fraud prevention tools in our environment, one of the things I've tried to do is to make sure we aren't bringing friction in unnecessarily on files, but then when we do bring friction in, we are proactive about it versus reactive, because I do think one of the number one fuels to fraud is when a closer makes an empathetic decision because they want to do right by their customer right at the end of the closing when everyone wants their money and you're trying to leave a good customer service impression. And so, yeah, I think the more proactive you can be, the better. And it both helps companies operate more efficiently by not wasting time on files that are should be dead because there's fraud involved. But it also just, I think, helps with the overall efficiency of the system.
All right. So let's talk about that, Nate, what was just shared. So I love Genady saying, get in front of them as early as possible, right?
Yeah, it's stark what he said, but it's true. The stakes are very high. It's a lot of money, and fraud attempts are rampant. We know that. We got to educate the buyer. And it's funny too, again, to think about it is we talk about this every day. I mean, literally every day I talk about fraud in this industry, but our consumer is not. This is one every 10 years on average. So it's really important that we put it in plain terms that the risk that they're under during this transaction.
Yeah, they may not even know what wire fraud. May not have any idea except for some random headline they saw one time about somebody going to jail around this thing or something like that.
They're worried if their mortgage is going to go through and going to close on time, and that's where they're at risk for this.
Yeah, for sure. So get their attention. We like to say, tell them over and over and over again until you close, essentially. And then something that Alex said, I think really stood out to me. Sorting the easy from the hard. How do you build something operationally into your system so that you're putting that friction in place or not putting it in place based on information that you have? And I think what we're talking about here is some of these fraud prevention tactics at scale can actually slow some things down.
Yeah.
And we certainly, especially if you're a large title agent, a large law firm doing hundreds and hundreds of transactions a month, you're trying to figure out how to scale this process. And maybe, a phone call to everybody makes sense when you're doing 30. It's a little harder when you start to get scale. Maybe it's something you still implement in terms of what your process is, like Genady said. And then maybe you start to layer in some technology to help assist that process. Who should we call? And I love how we basically said, most of the bad decisions happen right at the end. So maybe we can put some things in place to actually eliminate the last minute issues that come up.
Yeah. The risk on the title company is more on the seller side with the seller impersonation fraud. And we want to get in and give you some information about the parties involved at the beginning of the process. That should get, hopefully, your antenna up when we see patterns that we can associate with fraudulent transactions. That way, when the sob stories start, when the con men, con people try to start preying on your human biases, your antenna's already up and you might be a little more suspicious of that and have the proper context to evaluate it.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of seller identity fraud in particular gets figured out at some point. Somebody sniffs it out, they go to do a run, and all of a sudden you go, oh, this thing starts to fall apart. But that's too late. And so our systems and the way we've tried to do things automated and passive gives you that antenna up right away, the day you open the file in some cases, if you have the right information. So we've really tried to say, how do we get that antenna up? How do we do it passively where we're not requiring somebody to log into something or to take some ID verification or something like that to give you the right information you need early in the process.
Friction is a tool in security. We use it and we want to apply it where the risk is high. So that's how we've designed our system to work.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're on to the next question. And this one, we're going to just lean on Genady for all of our expertise.
He's got plenty of it.
And we're going to bring Alex back on the next one. But we're going to talk a little bit about what's been surprising, as a leader in this space. Obviously, Genady's seen a lot. What's been the most surprising thing? Let's hear from him on this next question.
I see it repeatedly. We make several assumptions at the start of the transaction. We assume that the first time someone contacts us, they actually are who they say they are. This isn't always true. Sometimes by the time you have a first interaction with buyer, seller, broker, or lender, it might already be a fraudster. If we're vigilant as agents, underwriters, or title companies, we assume that everyone else is too. If the buyer doesn't have a two-factor authentication enabled in their email account and uses the same password across all platforms, you can never be sure if you're communicating with a real person or a fraudster. Both can operate from the same mailbox. It's just that the fraudsters are often smarter. It's easier to spot squatted or free domains, but detecting impersonation is extremely difficult. I believe it's wise to whoever initiate the transaction to compile a list of everyone involved in the process, including their name, email address, and reliable phone number. We also have seen fraudsters using all communications channels to succeed in forgery. For example, if they're posing as a lender, they would send an email shortly followed by a text message and then a phone call. Both SMS and a phone call would show the respective bank on a caller ID.
I'm gonna let you take that one to start. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, well, and I think the way we've approached that problem is our ed tech assumes nothing. It is passive, right? So we talked about Alex brought up the concerns with overusing friction. So we start in the process with our seller verification with a background process, so that we are, checking for things like email, phone number, and name for those patterns that we associate with fraud. And when we collect proceeds accounts info, we're verifying the account details, right? Not who gave them to us. That's part of the process, but we're also verifying those details themselves to make sure that they line up with what we're expecting for that process. And same with payoffs, right? If the lender has been impersonated and gives you instructions, and it's clear that the account doesn't belong to that lender, which we can help you determine, then that kind of short circuits that whole process and the fraud can't go through. The fraud happens when the money moves. So as long as we're making sure that those details are correct and as expected, we're in much better shape.
Yeah. This concept of let's not assume they are who they say they are, whether that's, a buyer or seller coming into the process, or whether that's somebody who's potentially impersonating, a lender at payoff time or things of that nature. And I think some of the stuff that Genady mentioned, that just some things to be thinking about, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing, but it's like the other players in this process, while we should or could assume that they are being vigilant like we are, sometimes this is the first check anyone's actually making on that seller to say, is this person legit? And so to assume that, your partner in this is doing that, unfortunately, just isn't the case at this point. So, and whether they're coming in fraudulent from the start or getting hacked at some point throughout the process, we have to be making sure that we're not cutting corners and making assumptions when we don't really have the information or the data to do that. Like Nate said, we try to get out in front of that as much as possible, but this is an area of extreme vigilance that's necessary.
The fraudster will try to borrow trust from other entities involved in the process, and you've got to make sure that you're not relying too much on that borrowed trust and that you're doing your own homework on these people.
If they send a text and an email and then call you, most of our smartphones are going to go, this is probably Paul from Bell Mortgage or whatever it is, and the phone is going to do that. All of a sudden you go, oh, look at this, legit person. And again, like Nate said, borrowing that trust, stealing it to some degree. We got to be making sure that we're not making those assumptions. All right. Yes. All of that is surprising, slightly terrifying. But we do have the solutions in place to be able to get out in front and solve those things. Okay. So, all right. Things are getting more and more complex. And but we asked our panelists, where are we going from here? What's coming from a fraud prevention perspective? And so let's hear from Genady and Alex again on what they're seeing, what they're expecting, from what's the fraudster's playbook going to look like going forward.
Generative AI and toolkits represent the next frontier. Fraudsters have used phishing toolkits for years, and now generative AI can help create cleaner, more human-like phishing emails. It can generate dynamic URLs for phishing links that evade security technology. These kits are already aiding in the cloning of legitimate login pages for virtually any services. The next frontier will involve the automatic registration of type-squatting domains that match their victims and automation of email account creations. Additionally, let's not overlook deepfakes. They are on the horizon. You need to start establishing processes for dealing with deepfakes. One frequently recommended approach is to create a passcode that the key constituents can use to validate the authenticity of a party. If the person on the other end does not know the code, word, or phrase you establish in advance, they could be a deepfake. The same applies to voice verification for high-value or critical transaction. Voice cloning has been around for decades and has significantly improved to greater computing power and AI. I don't anticipate anything revolutionary in 2025, but the fraudster will automate many manual tasks, and speed of delivery and sophistication will greatly improve.
All right, let's hear from Alex as well.
Question is about what will the fraudsters focus on in the future. I got to say, I would love to talk about deep fakes and AI and all that fun stuff. And we've seen the stories, and I've read the articles and seen the YouTube videos about being on a Teams call trying to verify some information before you push out a wire, and 3 of the 4 people are fake on the call. So I mean, I'm sure we'll see some of that stuff that'll grab headlines just because it's crazy and high tech. But honestly, the whole wire process is just, I shake my head almost every day thinking, well, there's just got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way just to do wires. And we know that that's our problem to solve. But in the meantime, we have to lead into things like, some of these CloseSimple tools that we're using. And also we put an unbelievable amount of human effort into trying to prevent fraud. And it's excruciating and painful. And it's necessary to keep our company safe, to keep our people's money safe, to make this a good place to work, so that we're not opening ourselves up to fraud that could, cost client relationships, that kind of thing for our people. So, the fraudsters are probably going to do some new and fun stuff. And honestly, there's plenty of opportunity in the current system, and we just all have to do our best to try to avoid it.
All right. All right. So I love how Genady and even Alex to some degree are saying like probably similar tactics, but like sped up and hitting from even more angles because of all this additional AI technology. So maybe not a deep fake AI, but the ability to speed up the process of boom, 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 boom.
They're going to knock on every door to find one that's unlocked. And the effort, the cost of them getting involved in sending out these requests is just getting cheaper and cheaper. So expect the volume to increase. But I agree, similar tactics, but you're just going to keep seeing more of it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think a couple of the actual themes that we're hearing from these guys, and even as we were having conversations leading up to this, is we really have to be thinking about the full process from start to finish. How do we make sure that at any point where fraud could come in, that we're actually anticipating that and making sure that we're getting out
in front of it? Exactly.
Getting out in front of it as much as we can. Again, having a concise customer experience, layering in tools to work with the manual processes that you've built, everything that these guys have been talking about. So this has been a lot. We've actually got one more clip that we want to share, and this is about wins. Okay, so what are we actually seeing in terms of wins within these 2 organizations and what Genady and Alex are seeing? And then we'll get to the end of this webinar. So let's hear one more video from each of them, and we'll dive into those right now.
Some innovations that newer technology company brings to a closing process will definitely help. The explosion of security breaches over the last few years and consequent identity theft created a new opportunity for underground economy. There is a plethora of illegitimate and inexpensive services that can provide a fake ID and other documents. ID verification services will become a norm over the next 2 years, not only for real estate industry, but also for hiring practices, employee validation, for password resets, and other use cases. This would not be limited to online transactions, but will extend to person-to-person interactions. This technology is maturing every day. Start thinking about your use cases and how you can adopt this technology.
Like it. Let's hear from Alex.
Wins. This whole thing you guys are doing here is a win. I mean, I think the fact we're talking about this thing more openly, we're sharing our stories, we are kind of collaborating amongst ourselves better than we have. I've had some great conversations when I've been to MLTA or ALTA meetings on a national level with people that were having fraud happen, and we've traded stories. And I've called up competitors. Honestly, hope you guys aren't offended by this, but I've called up other competitors that had used some of the CloseSimple tools, and I've collaborated with them on what this thing looks like and how we can, get a grip on what we're doing here and make sure that when one of us goes out on a limb to try to stop fraud, that our competitors don't use that against us as if we're doing something that are, egregious, when all we're trying to do is keep the consumer safe. So I think having meetings like this or online things like this is the first win. And then on an internal company level, like the conversations we've been having in and around fraud, because we're doing this stuff and because we're leaning into it, has been good. like I think my closers are a little cranky that, you know, we're making them slow down and double checks and stuff on some files. But at the end of the day, we've had some great conversations, and I think we've increased their education on the topic, and we've allowed we've set up messaging so that they can take that to the consumer and to our clients and just explain why we think this is important, because ultimately fighting fraud is everybody's job, and doing a good job at it is something we can rally around and celebrate and honestly sell to make our company better.
I like it. I feel like it's a good wrap, Nate.
Yeah.
I love what Genady's saying, because he's saying this type of ID verification and the tools that we're starting to see leveraged across our industry are going to become commonplace everywhere, which means it's not going to feel like as much friction, and people are going to start getting used to this kind of thing because they know that it's a protective thing for them. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to lean into that as well, and to say, look, it's okay to put this in front of your customer because this is protecting them and it's protecting you. And I think 9 out of 10 consumers are going to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how he pointed out that the technology to fight this is getting better. Hopefully at a speed that is better than the technology being used to perpetrate these frauds. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I love Alex saying, we're talking about this stuff more. And like, there's a cool thing happening even in Minneapolis where title companies are coming together. We do a lot of split closings here, where if you're representing a buyer, there's now an understanding that there's going to be a check on that other title company's seller. And everyone's going, yeah, we got to start getting together on this. And it's some collaboration across title companies that I've never seen before, and I think is really interesting in this space. The fact that we're doing this at a national level, like Alex said, all the way down to our teams, is really encouraging. So any last words on that, Nate, before we sign off here?
I like that too. I've been saying it for a while, but fraud shouldn't be, or fraud prevention shouldn't be a competitive advantage in this industry. We should all be working together to prevent fraud. That's better for all of us. So just happy to be a part of it and offering some solutions that can really help.
Nice. I like it. All right. So thank you so much for everyone joining the webinar today. Again, at CloseSimple, we're crushing fraud, not hearts this February. If you want to get one of these mugs, Crush Fraud, Not Hearts, or a 6-pack for your team, email me, paul@closesimple.com. If you want to hear more, get into a deeper conversation, maybe touch on some things that you heard today, Nate and I love getting into good conversations with people in the industry and helping you kind of hear what we're hearing across the industry and, you know, in the conversations we're having nationally, but then also learning from you about what's working for you. What are you working on in your business to try to move things forward and get past, you know, this constant sort of like barrage of stuff that we're having, and get it out in front of it and get proactive. So if you want to do that, you want to connect with us, you can again email me, paul@closesimple.com. Thanks so much for being with us today. Again, let's go crush fraud and not hearts this February and throughout 2025. Have a great day. Thanks again.